All right, welcome. Today's section is going to be looking at trauma-informed care, which is also abbreviated as TIC, and you'll see that throughout the presentation. So the single most compelling reason to understand trauma, its impact, and the importance of trauma-informed care is the prevalence of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which is higher than was previously estimated and is associated with high rates of medical and mental health services, making it one of the costliest underdiagnosed problems in American healthcare today. So up on the screen, you will see information about PTSD. Please take a minute to review. And here's a quote around PTSD, so go ahead and take a minute to read this. So up on the screen, you will find more information about TIC, so please go ahead and take a moment to read that. So TIC at its core is designed to be both preventative as well as rehabilitating. So those two pieces are going to play into how this is being framed. So trauma-informed care, this is a framework which recognizes the profound multidimensional impact of trauma and incorporates that understanding into services and treatment approaches. Recently, researchers conducted a review of the literature and they identified key principles of TIC, which you can see up on the screen. They include trauma awareness, an emphasis on safety, opportunities to rebuild control, and use of a strengths-based approach. So this approach addresses the relationship between environmental and subjective triggers, the perception of danger, and the neurobiological activation that leads to a distressed physical state, resulting in problematic behaviors. There are 5 essential elements of TIC. So first up on the screen is the administrative commitment to TIC and change. So there's a need to recognize the impact that trauma can have on people's lives. The consistent delivery of TIC is only as effective as the organization's commitment, which must extend to administrative practices with staff members, program policies and procedures, program design, staffing patterns, use of peer support, staff and peer training and supervision, organizational assessment, and consumer feedback, and resources to uphold trauma-informed principles and practices. Typically, desirable organizational change doesn't occur by accident. It comes from steadfast leadership, a convincing message that change is necessary and beneficial for staff and consumers, and resources that support the change. Many people naturally resist change, thus an organization's commitment includes a willingness to discuss with staff members the impact and role of trauma in their service setting, patience in planning and implementation, and the ability to tolerate the uncertainty that naturally accompanies transition. The second one is universal screening. So there needs to be the same practices across the board, no discriminating in any capacity. The next one is staff training and education. Continuing education is mandatory for staff and volunteers throughout their experience. Next is hiring practices. So having these be inclusive, staff, volunteers, everybody should be treated respectfully and equally. And finally, a review of policies and procedures. So a review of policies and procedures creates an opportunity to explore and reevaluate the organization's values, mission, and vision, yet agencies cannot adequately develop a trauma-informed organization without obtaining specific information about internal, so things like staff resources and processes, as well as external environment, so referral, consultation, changes in healthcare, funding sources, etc. So that all needs to be taken into consideration in order to adequately review the policies and procedures. So up on the screen, you'll see the 4-fold principles of TIC. So normalizing and validating a client's feelings and experiences, assisting them in understanding the past and its emotional impact, empowering survivors to better manage their current lives, and helping them understand current challenges in light of past victimization. So these fundamental principles support person-centered, recovery-oriented treatment planning and are cornerstones in a trauma-informed environment. So everything that we do here with our clients, our primary focus is going to be on that person's strengths and assets rather than on the problems or any sort of deficits that we see in them as an individual. Everything is completely person-centered. So we talked a couple of times already, but just to reiterate, everything we do here is individualized. Each client, each survivor that comes through the door has their own experience, their own situation, and so being treated as their own person rather than a number or just another client is really important. And this will help to honor the client's own life experience as well as getting to know what happened to them in a way that's individualized and compassionate. So understanding how trauma can affect a person's self-capacities is important when discussing the issue the person is having with sustaining and maintaining their day-to-day activities and life skills. This is the central hub to what we do here. Trauma, especially in childhood, is going to rob its victims of a stable sense of self. those self capacities are going to reflect basic coping mechanisms. And so if a survivor is missing those, it's going to cause problems for them in coping with what happened. So that's something that we as their advocates can certainly help them do, help them establish healthy coping mechanisms to better process what happened and do it in a way that's healthy and that will allow them to sort of continue on in the healing process. So we want to make sure that we're encouraging or helping our clients to sustain and maintain their day-to-day activities. If there is a lack in those self-capacities, that those coping mechanisms, it's more likely to lead to substance abuse, isolation, self-harm, as well as other things. So trauma-informed care lets us address issues a survivor is facing in that day-to-day while not losing sight of the connection that trauma has to these issues. So unlike trauma-centered interventions where the underlying trauma is the primary focus, trauma-informed practices helps a survivor develop their capacities for managing distress and engaging in more effective daily functioning. Trauma-informed care is going to let us provide a sort of corrective emotional experience for survivors. And this is done through relationship building. So that relationship that you build with the clients you work with can help to challenge any distortions they have in their thinking process in terms of how they view themselves, as well as how they view others. The way you react to the survivor and their story is going to help give voice to their own reactions. So it'll help to validate and empower them. And a key or a side note here, so this is not acting in a way that's, how am I wanting to say this? So we want to be careful to control our emotional reactions to the stories that clients are telling us so that we're not making them less inclined to share what happened. If they are receiving a really visual emotional response from you when they disclose something that happened to them, that can actually make them not want to share more of their story. So you want to react in a way that's empathetic, in a way that's letting them know that what happened to them is not their fault. You want that empathy, but you don't want to be completely breaking down on them emotionally, because that's not going to be helpful for the situation. And we'll get into this more later on, but I did just want to point that out. Okay, so now looking at recovery planning. So an agency informed about trauma will seek the full inclusion of the people they serve in order to engage them in their own recovery process, no matter how long that might take. So we are all about empowerment here. Every single thing that's done is done with the participation of the client. So if they come in and they say they're looking for housing, we certainly are going to help support that, but we're not going to do everything ourselves. We want to engage that client. We want them to be participating in the process. Now, that's not to say that we don't help them in any capacity. We do. But we want to empower them to be able to do things for themselves. We want them engaged in that recovery process. If they're just here and kind of along for the ride, it's never going to benefit them. So the more they can be engaged in what's happening, the better off they're going to be in that process in the long run. So there are 4 R's, which you'll see up on the screen. So it's realize, recognize, respond, and resist. So realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved with the system, respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and resist re-traumatization whenever possible. So an essential sensory experience key to creating a trauma-informed care service is the comfort of the physical environment. This is the first impression and first opportunity to convey care and respect. It also sets the stage and foundation for the client and advocate relationship. So if you actually look at information about trauma-informed environments, and we have a handout that we'll provide you as well, but it really talks about everything from the way the entrance of the office looks. So think about our waiting room, to the individual offices that we're meeting clients in. You know, are there windows? Is there more than one exit for a client to get out? Do you allow a client to choose their own seating when they come into the office? All of these things are going to either positively or negatively impact that client or survivor's view of the environment they're in, and can make them feel either more or less safe depending on the circumstance. So you'll see when you take a look at the handout that there are some things that we're doing pretty well here, but there's some things that we're certainly struggling with because it's a really small office. All of the spaces are pretty small and sort of enclosed, and all of those will lead to a potentially negative impact or negative view from the client's perspective. So doing whatever you can to make the environment comfortable is important. Okay, so we have an activity. This is that list that I've been referencing. So we're looking at trauma-informed versus not trauma-informed. So you'll find more information on the quiz. So you can jump over there now and take a look at that, or you can finish this presentation and then go back to the quiz at the end. So that was our trauma-informed care, or our TIC section. I hope that you learned some new information, especially around sort of environmental factors to be keeping in mind when you're working with the clients that we serve. So thank you so much for attending.